I think my bio doesn't say that I went to Ohio State first. So I'm a Buckeye. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. We'll start with a video. Who's been to a cocktail party or a networking event and asked somebody, what do you do? In this case, this guy works on researching a new kind of battery and heard this. You could turn up the sound. Thanks.
Carbon cathode, potassium flows across the electrolyte, meeting that oxygen, forming potassium superoxide on the forest carbon substrate. All right? Once that forest carbon substrate is completely coated in potassium superoxide, it's time to recharge the battery. Electricity is supplied from an external source to decompose the potassium superoxide back into potassium, and oxygen leaves the battery. So has everybody got that? Ready to build batteries?
Okay. I'm not ready to build a battery. How about you? So who's met that person at a cocktail party or a networking event? Who's been that person at a cocktail party? All right. I don't work in a scientific field. I don't come from that background. But we work all day, every day with people like you or with business leaders and executives who have something important, critical, complicated to translate to an audience, but oftentimes have a difficult time accomplishing that task, right? So this is a gentleman who did it in a TEDx talk, and he did it as a joke, right? But oftentimes, this is what we see, and this is what we're trying to combat. So I could stand up here and I could give you lots of tools and lots of ideas, or I could show you what it looks like and feels like when it's done right, and you guys can get your hands dirty using some of those techniques. And that's what we're going to do today. We are content agnostic, but we are methodologically specific in how we approach this work. I come from a background in public opinion research and communications, and these days we work a lot in the TED-style talk. Just a show of hands, has anybody not seen a TED talk at this point, or is anybody not familiar with TED? Okay, so we'll jump forward a little bit in that TED has really transformed the way in which people want to hear and expect to hear information, right? It's a shorter format. There's no notes. There's not a lot of words on the slides. There's no podium. It's less than 18 minutes max, right? Generally speaking, when we do work here at OSU or at Nationwide Children's or with other partners, we're really talking about 10 to 12 minutes. But the truth is, if you plan it out well, the same structure that supports you in a 10, 12, 18-minute talk or a 45-minute presentation could be done on one foot in 30 seconds in an elevator. Right? But there's a lot of planning that goes into those 30 seconds to get it right first, to then be able to support it with more examples and more data and more stories on the back end. Right? So let's jump right into it. The first strategy that we'll share is building context. Okay? What does your audience need to know? What are the questions that they need answered before they could possibly understand what problem you're trying to solve? Okay? This is different than laddering, really giving them the information, and we'll talk about that later, in order to understand an elevated concept. But can they understand the problem you're trying to solve? Is it even a question that they have on their mind yet, right? Sometimes you're so in the project that you're working on that other people don't even know that it's a problem yet to be solved. Understanding what the mindset is of the audience and where they come from before you start is always the most critical step to begin this process. I'll show you a clip from a TED Talk done by Eli Pariser back in 2011. Now, this is big news today, but in 2011, the algorithms that determine what you see on the internet this was not a conversation that people even knew existed. So he had to paint a picture for the audience first of why this is a question that should even be on their mind. So let's take a look at that example.
Mark Zuckerberg, a journalist, was asking him a question about the news feed. And the journalist was asking him, why is this so important? And Zuckerberg said, a squirrel dying in your front yard may be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa. And I want to talk about what a web based on that idea of relevance might look like. So when I was growing up in a really rural area in Maine, the internet meant something very different to me. It meant a connection to the world. It meant something that would connect us all together. And I was sure that it was going to be great for democracy and for our society. But there's this kind of shift in how information is flowing online. And it's invisible. And if we don't pay attention to it, it could be a real problem. So I first noticed this in a place I spend a lot of time, my Facebook page. I'm progressive politically, big surprise, but I've always gone out of my way to meet conservatives. I like hearing what they're thinking about. I like seeing what they link to. I like learning a thing or two. And so I was kind of surprised when I noticed one day that the conservatives had disappeared from my Facebook feed. And what it turned out was going on was that Facebook was looking at which links I clicked on. And it was noticing that actually I was clicking more on my liberal friends' links than on my conservative friends' links. And without consulting me about it, it had edited them out. They disappeared. So Facebook isn't the only place that's doing this kind of invisible algorithmic editing of the web.
Eli Pariser ran an organization called MoveOn.org. So if you're not familiar, it's a large social justice, social advocacy platform, left-leaning, was a large part of responsibility for the online presence in Obama's initial campaign and then following and those types of things. He has all sorts of algorithms, all sorts of data points that he could have brought to share with the audience the context of why this matters. But he didn't, right? He brought you a Facebook feed, right? Something that we could understand. And he gave you that example in order to paint the picture and provide the context for a problem that the audience did not yet know or care about. So let's try this, okay? Take your pencil, and I can't see those, so apologize for turning around. Envision your audience being a room of reporters, right? We're doing Wellness Wednesday, right? This is making your science accessible, not dumbing it down, but making it accessible to other smart people who just aren't in your field. They understand some science, but not yours. What context do you need to give them to understand the problem that you are addressing? Not all of the science context, but the context that you need to give them to understand the problem you're trying to solve. Right? So take a few minutes, work on that, and then we'll share with a partner. Another way you can think about this problem is, what's at stake if this problem doesn't get solved? Is another way to ask the same question. Okay. If you've wrapped up on your context, find a partner, turn to your side, turn behind you, something like that, and share your context with, ideally, somebody you don't know and who does not share the same research as you. Who thinks that their partner has a particularly well-crafted context, short, not battery man-like, to share with the group? Who got context right? Who's partner? Okay. Do you mind? Is this mic live? Do we know? If not, I'll stand next to you. Here, there's people listening. There you go. Try that.
Hey, with the advance of the current medicine, so the physician, they have availability to treat a variable disease that we don't even think of, like a couple of years ago. One of this is organ transplants. But to achieve the organ transplantation, physicians have to suppress the immune system for the patients, and this is create a vulnerable population that they are susceptible to something that we don't even thought that it can cause an illness in human populations. One of them is the Epstein-Barr virus. We can talk more about it.
Okay, great. So we solved one problem in terms of organ transplants, but we've created potentially another one that we don't yet know how to solve with the immunosuppressant drugs. Fantastic. All right, context, got it? Everybody's on the same page? That one is live?
Yeah, this was
Great. Then I'll keep this one to myself. Just back up here. All right. Okay, context. Is there one other example? Anybody have another particularly great one? If not, we'll catch you on the second round. All right. Chance for everyone. Thank you. All right, laddering. Laddering. This is different than context in that we might understand the end game. I understand that we're trying to figure out how to solve dealing with people who are now immune systems are compromised, right? I understand the end game, but I don't understand any of the rules on how we're going to get there. So this is the building blocks, right? If we had to explain A building block and B building block and C building block before I could understand how you're going to make a tower, this is the concept of laddering. And we have great examples, local examples of people that have done this. So this one, thanks to Robin and Dr. Jackson and the discovery themes, this is Samantha King, also associated with NCH. And she does a particularly excellent example of explaining a really complicated concept, or at least to me, a really complicated concept, maybe not so much of you. And she'll show you how you build all of those different pieces so that people then can understand the end.
All molecules made by the human body
It might be a little loud.
and all surfaces in your body are covered with complex carbohydrates. Now these are structures made up of simple sugars, and they serve a lot of functions. But one thing that happens is that bacteria can use those to bind to your body. So other bacteria that cause endocarditis are known to bind to the terminal or end carbohydrate on some of these structures. Now, the way I'm showing it to you here is very simple. There's one adhesin, a molecule in the bacterium, and one on the carbohydrate, and they're binding together. But obviously, it's a much more complex interaction than that. And many of these interactions are going on at the same time. They're all pretty weak, but overall, we think of it like Velcro. A lot of weak interactions allow binding of that bacteria to the platelet. So with Streptococcus aureus, when we started, no one knew how it bound to platelets. Now, clearly, it might bind in the same way to this terminal carbohydrate, and we've since shown that it does. But what we did know is the bacteria actually makes a molecule that can cleave off that terminal carbohydrate. So if you think about that for a minute, it doesn't make a lot of sense that this would be the only way that the bacteria can bind to a platelet. We think of it like this. It's like you're sitting on a branch and you're cutting that branch off at the same time. So this is where I thought maybe I could place that other piece of puzzle. We'd previously shown that Streptococcus pneumoniae could bind to a carbohydrate that was revealed by the removal of that terminal carbohydrate. And we thought perhaps Streptococcus aureus could do the same thing. And in fact, we now know that it does. Now, the reason those puzzle pieces couldn't be moved from one puzzle directly to the other is because they actually bind that carbohydrate in different ways, which actually makes it more interesting and was what piqued our interest. So we call this sequential binding because the bacteria first binds to the terminal carbohydrate, which is then removed, and then it can bind to the underlying carbohydrate.
So you get each individual building block alone first, right? She gave you A, she gave you B, she gave you C, and then she shows you A to B to C, laddering up the concept. Once you understand the first, you can follow her to the third. She didn't entirely dummy it down, but she made it accessible to people that might be unfamiliar with that concept, right? She's still using adhesion and bacterium and all of the right words, right? Platelet, things like that, but we can understand it as somebody from the outside. I'll share one more laddering example before we do an exercise on this tool, and that is with data. This is Rob Brisk. He runs the Wellington School here in Columbus, and he gave a TEDx Columbus talk. And this one focuses specifically on data. So if you have lots of data and you need to describe something specific about it to the audience.
First, when we talk about love of learning, the term we're actually measuring is student engagement. And student engagement exists when two phenomena happen at the same time. First, students, to be engaged, have to be challenged. So we look for high challenge in student engagement. And at the same time they're being challenged, they should love it. Seems simple, doesn't it? And that students who have the phenomenon, both of those phenomena at the same time, we say are engaged. Students who are challenged and hate it, that's a phenomenon we refer to as the grind. Students who hate it and are unchallenged are quite simply bored. And finally, students who are unchallenged and love it, we call that entertained. So, what we do is 3 times a year, we ask students to get a list of their classes and they place them in the appropriate grid. And we get searchable data in all sorts of ways. We can get a variety of classes. And here you can see a comparison between 2 classes, 2 different teachers, but the same students. As we reflect on this, we can see when we look at teacher number 2's constellation of dots, that her students are telling her that she is not sufficiently challenging them. And that is powerful data for a teacher. I want to talk a little bit also about, we can, because this is live data, we can drill down and look at individual students. So, we have many students that we are delighted to say they're incredibly engaged. This 11th grade girl is a straight A student. But we can know from this constellation that she's got a problem in biology class even though she's getting an A. And before a student is a disciplinary problem or drops out, we might know that this 10th grade boy is overwhelmed, or this 9th grade girl we may have lost.
Lots of data, and there's a lot of data analytics happening, and especially with the research, when you have so much to compile and then to share, what he did was he broke out very nicely first the definition he was going to use across all of these charts, so that, and then as you followed him through the concept, you could understand what all of those meant. Right? If he'd started with this chart, he would have had to go backwards in order to share the context and explain to you how you were supposed to interpret it. So he gave you the building blocks first and then helped to bring you along to his conclusion. Questions, concerns? Okay. We're going to try it outside of your own research for a minute. Okay. Because sometimes you need to go outside of your own sphere in order to learn the tool. Explain to a Martian that doesn't know what bread is, what it is, and how it's made. And then share it. So I'm going to ask both of you to write it, okay, so that everybody gets to practice with it. But then let's let one of you be the Martian and one of you be the Earthling, and see if the Martian can poke some holes and questions into whether or not you gave us enough building blocks in order to understand what it is and how to make bread. Go ahead. So you don't need the context. Somebody was just asking, we're struggling with the context. Sorry to call you out. You don't need the context in this one, right? This is a separate exercise. We're looking at the building blocks. Context is the Martian doesn't know what bread is. All right. Does anyone have a winning recipe for bread? Anyone? A close to winning recipe for bread? Who's got one? I'm sensitive to the introverts in the room, but those who know me know that I will call you out if I don't get a volunteer. Anybody who thinks they have a semi-edible piece of bread? Karina. You're welcome. Or your partner, whichever.
So I have bread is a foodstuff that's very filling and eaten by most earthlings. It's comprised of ground grains and an agent that makes it rise, which is yeast, that relies on a complex reaction that uses sugars to produce tiny air bubbles that makes the product puffy. It's then cooked in a heat-fueled oven until moisture levels are low enough so that the product comes together in a sturdy structure and can be eaten.
Okay. I called on the right person. We had their Martian ears on. Robin was joking that my role is to serve as Martian for many clients when they have a complicated scientific topic that I really don't understand, which is coming up next. We have a guest star in the audience. Izu, you're coming up next in the videos, is to serve as that person and say, I don't get this part or I don't get that part in order to be able to follow you. And so you've played with it with bread, but think about it in terms of your own work. We won't do that right now, but take it as a tool. What do people need to understand as the building blocks before they can follow you to your solution? Right? Thank you, Karina. Metaphors. Okay, here we go. This is one of my favorites, I have to say. It is a story or a metaphor is a bridge from something you know and care about to something your audience does not yet know and care about. Okay? And we have a wonderful example from here at OSU, and you'll forgive me because I'm about to put him up on the screen. And I have to say that we worked really, really hard, right? Our first call when I learned about CRISPR and nanotechnology, all in 1 hour. It was a lot to digest. And so it became very clear that in order for an audience that was not familiar with this topic, they would really need some type of metaphor in order to understand how this worked, okay? And so I'm gonna share with you a clip from a video from one of your colleagues about CRISPR and nanotechnology.
Work. This is a simplified illustration of the process. When virus invades bacterial triggers this CRISPR system, which is composed of a guide RNA and a Cas9 protein. Guide RNA identifies the viral DNA. Cas9, like a scissors, cut the viral DNA into pieces. Consequently, bacteria is able to get rid of viral infection. Very smart strategy. Does human cell produce this CRISPR system? No, we don't have this system. Could we utilize this system to work against the viral infections? Maybe. There are several challenges. One of the key challenges is to deliver the CRISPR system into the infected cells. Because the CRISPR system is not stable, after injection, the system will be degraded within minutes in the human blood. So we really need a delivery vehicle. Imagine we are truck drivers. We need to load the CRISPR system, transport them into the infected cells, and then this system can achieve the function and eliminate viral infections. So my lab is working on new nanotechnology which can serve as delivery vehicles.
I think that deserves a round of applause because that was really hard work, and he did an excellent job in getting us there in really understanding, right, the guide. There's something that points it out. There's scissors that cut it. Simple system that we can understand, although it's obviously very complex. And then a delivery system. So you saw the truck, but if you saw the rest of the talk, you would also see that the new nanotechnology was going to replace the truck, right? Maybe we need a plane, or maybe we need a boat, something else that was going to be a better, more sophisticated delivery system. So we all understand trucks, we all understand planes, right? Trains, those kinds of things. So it made it that even though I don't really understand nanotechnology, I can understand what he's working on because he gave me a metaphor that I could grab onto that would be helpful to understand that. Thank you. All right. The second one that I'll share is done more as a story. So this was TEDx Ohio State University, and this is Andrea Grottoli, and she's talking about coral bleaching and what happens to a coral reef, which can be a really complicated topic, right? We could go really big and really deep and really detailed, or she could tell a story from the point of view of a coral, using all of the sensory elements that we need to hear in stories. What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? Right? All of those senses are what helps you understand and connect to and remember a story.
Below the surface, you can see what a typical healthy reef in this part of Hawaii looks like. But what does it feel like to be a coral on that reef in a warming, more acidic ocean? And in particular, when heat waves come through and are topping up that temperature even more. And I want to tell you that story from the point of view of a coral called Cora, who lives on a reef just like this. It's hot in here. Have you noticed? It's boiling. It's been at least 2 degrees Celsius warmer than usual for several weeks, and I just can't take it. I've upregulated my heat shock proteins, and it's not happening. And don't get me started on my endosymbiotic algae. They are not doing their job. Normally, they photosynthesize a ton and give me all kinds of sugar to eat and keep me really well fed. In exchange, I give them nutrients from the zooplankton that I eat, and we have a really good symbiosis. But when it gets hot like this, they shut down. And on top of that, they start giving off all these free radicals that really interfere with my cellular function and cellular integrity. So I think I'm just gonna have to get rid of them because they're just messing it all up. So I'm gonna get rid of my endosymbiotic algae. Are you ready? Here we go. Wow, I feel a lot better, but naked. Because now, without my endosymbiotic algae, you see right through my clear gelatinous tissue to my skeleton, and I look so pale. I look bleached, like this image, bleached. And in this bleached state, I don't feel good at all. But I'm doing so much better than that guy over there.
Okay. She could have told us what happens to a coral reef, right? Using most of the same words. But the fact that she brought us in to the story of Cora, right? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How's Cora experiencing that process is what shared that story with us so that we could understand it, have a little humor in it, and care more about what she was sharing with us. This is a multi-step process for this exercise. So we'll take it part by part. Go ahead and go back into your own research, right? We're off of bread. We'll go back into your real work. And write down adjectives that describe the research. Okay, is it hard? Is it taking a long time, right? Write down things about it to give us a sense of how you're experiencing that. And then the next part is we give you a couple options, weather conditions, food, sports that you could relate. So if I'm working on a project and it's really complicated right now and it's really hard and we're slugging through it, right? And there's a lot of complicating factors. I might say, you know, it's stormy seas, right? But we're headed towards smooth sailing, right? So that's a weather condition and a travel pattern. It might be food, it might be sports, it's the 7th inning stretch, those kinds of terminology. Give us that in terms of describing what it's like, right? What's it like now, or where are you headed with it? Both of those parts. When you're done with that, try to combine them together. So add your adjectives to your weather conditions or your food or your sports or your travel, however it is, right? Combine those two things, add your adjectives in, and you should end up with some type of a description of the research and the process that you're working on. When you're done with that, share it with your team partner, whoever you've been talking to. Okay. Let's bring it back together. There were a couple. I'll take volunteers, but if not, I heard a few. You got a good one over here? All right. You've been called out by your partner. Let me grab you the mic, though. Hold on one second. Let's hear your metaphor.
All right. So my project that I'm working on is very multidisciplinary, so it involves a lot of people.
Okay.
So when I think of it as though you're trying to herd cats. You know, every time you get a hold of one of them and you think it's on the same page, all the others are taking off on you.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Herding cats. Thank you. That's a good analogy. Who's got another one? Can I call? I heard gardening over here. Do you mind? Can I call you out? And I'm coming to 3D puzzle next, if you don't mind. There you go.
So my research is like a vegetable garden, and we know what's planted in different areas of the garden. We still have to go in and dig it up. And then once it's dug up, they're still just boring vegetables by themselves. And in order to make them palatable and most interesting and most beneficial for the most number of people, we have to combine them in lots of different ways. Maybe this means we need to cut them up. Maybe this means we need to season them or put dressing on them. But in the end, whatever we have for that person is still the vegetables that we know we planted, and that's what we know that works.
Great. And what was the adjective? What was the adjective to start? Was it complicated, hard, confusing? What did you have?
Hidden in what we know and personalized.
Personalized. Okay. Very interesting.
Sure. I work in rehabilitation research for people with neurologic disorders and trying to implement what we know about exercise for people in the population into the community where they can access it.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right.
Okay. So my research deals with a lot of complexities and a lot of interactions, and it's kind of like building this giant 3D jigsaw puzzle, but the trick is that there's a lot of missing pieces. And so you're still trying to put together to get the overall picture of what you're seeing, you know, a disease state, for example, or you know, whatever you're trying to see. But the big complexity is those missing pieces and not quite knowing whether two things are joined if they're not directly touching.
Got it. Thank you. And what is your research about?
I'm a comp biologist. Oh, mixed integration.
Say it one more time. In English.
I'm a computational biologist,
Okay.
and so I integrate a lot of high throughput, large scale data, measuring all sorts of different molecules in your body.
All right. Thank you. So the metaphor was helpful then to understand that part of it. Thank you. All right. And the last is, right, I understand that there are a lot of people who just enjoy basic science. And some people are in your field and others because this is what you really enjoy doing. But there's also an element of envisioning what's possible. What's the impact ultimately of your work, right? If you stretched it out 50 years, 100 years, right? What do you hope is going to come of all of the important critical work that you're doing today? In order for someone to support you and want to really invest in what you're doing, whether it's actual investment or just really be invested in understanding it and caring about it, you have to paint a picture of what the future could look like. So who gave the most famous vision speech? You nailed it, right? This is a vision speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
One of the elements from a rhetoric perspective that is so powerful in the way that that is constructed is the juxtaposition of the reality of today versus what is possible tomorrow. The heat and oppression of today versus the oasis of freedom tomorrow. When you can demonstrate both of those things up against each other, you can explain to an audience what it looks like now and what it could be in the future. That is the most famous version, but we'll give you another one that is, additionally, that is a TED Talk about driverless cars, right? This is Google's driverless car, and talking about what it could be, where it could take us. Oh, except for it went away. Hang on. There we go.
Now, I can't get my friend Harold back to life, but I can do something for all the people who died. Did you know that driving accidents are the #1 cause of death for young people? And do you realize that almost all of those are due to human error and not machine error, and can therefore be prevented by machines? Do you realize that we could change the capacity of highways by a factor of 2 or 3 if we didn't rely on human precision on staying in the lane, but on robotic precision, and thereby drive a little bit closer together, on a little bit narrower lanes, and do away with all traffic jams on highways? Do you realize that you, TED users, spend an average of 52 minutes per day in traffic, wasting your time on your daily commute? You could regain this time. This is 4 billion hours wasted in this country alone, and it's 2.4 billion gallons of gasoline wasted. Now, I think there's a vision here, a new technology, and I'm really looking forward to a time when generations after us look back at us and say how ridiculous it was that humans were driving cars. Thank you.
We all know what it's like to be stuck in traffic, right? We all know how frustrating it can be, and all of those elements that are part of our daily life today, but he painted us a picture of what it could be, what could be different in the future. So let's take this last exercise. Pick a project you're working on that involves change, and we'll assume that your research project involves that you're trying to change something. And using the 5 senses, we talked about the sensory element needed in a story, describe what it's like today, and then describe, again, using those same sensory elements, what the experience would look like in the future. And if you want to go into the future, a year from now, fine. You want to go into the future 25 years from now, fine. You pick what it would look like in order to transport your audience to where you want them to see the vision of the impact of what you're working on. Go ahead and share that last one with your partner. And this is the last exercise we'll do before you wrap it all up with your elevator speech. Okay. Who's got a vision to share? Volunteers on visions? Over here. Ooh, can you pass that, Cami? Sorry. There you go. It's on.
Okay. So there are employees that work at OSUMC that throw up on their way to work because they're overcome with anxiety and stress, knowing what they're going to face when they get to work. But I envision a day through providing mindfulness training at both the individual and system level at OSUMC for employees to be driving to work with a tingling sensation of being excited about what they're going to face.
Great. Thank you. Very nice. Very nice example. I was like, right? I went like that when you gave the first part of what is today. So thank you. Perfect, right? What does it look like today? What's it going to be tomorrow? Certainly, we have sensory elements involved with that. This last piece I share because I've worked with enough of your researchers to know that no matter how many times I tell you not to use the jargon of your respective departments or fields, that it's really hard for you, understandably, to get up in front of an audience that may include some of your peers and not use that terminology, right? They're gonna think, I don't know what I'm talking about. We're supposed to use these words. No, I couldn't possibly do it without these words. We've heard all of it. Dr. Kripe from Nationwide Children's did a really nice job of combining both of those things when you need to speak to a mixed audience, right? So you have some people that get it, some people that don't get it, and we need to be able to talk to both of them. So he's gonna talk about immunotherapy in terms of cancer. And what he did here is that what you'll hear him use are words that the audience can understand. But what you will see in addition on the screen are labels, letters, numbers that people within his field would recognize, but that the rest of us wouldn't know what they mean, but they won't bother us. So this is a good example of being able to accomplish both of those things for a mixed audience, for multiple audiences, while still not speaking over the heads of the people that don't yet get it.
Cancers are often resisting treatments. Now, some of these cells are so different from normal that the immune system ought to recognize them as foreign. So T cells, shown here in blue, that would come into the tumor, which they often do, and recognize it as foreign, they bounce off the tumor, essentially. They can't see it. And we've not understood why for a long time. And we now know why, and it's what I'm showing here. Normal tumors actually recruit normal cells to become part of the tumor mass. These cells are macrophages, suppressor cells, suppressor T cells, myeloid-derived cells. These normal cells they don't succumb to chemotherapy and radiation. And what they do in the tumor is they help feed the tumor, they help it grow, they change its biology. They help it resist treatments. So we need to understand these invisibility cloak, which I've shown here in the sort of haze, the fog, because these cells are also produce substances in the microenvironment that suppress the immune system. So now we know that's why when T cells do recognize some of these different cancer cells as foreign and they invade the tumor, they can't do anything because of all this invisibility cloak.
Right. So all of those things are things that someone that studies this can understand. I have no idea what they mean. They don't bother me, right? but because I understand what purpose they're serving. But he was able to do that in order to address both audiences. It's not something you need to practice as an exercise right now, but more so that just keep it in your back pocket, add it to the toolbox of a way that you could potentially address that so that you don't have that same concern when you get up in front of a group that does include your peers as well. We're going to conclude with actually taking all of these different pieces and parts together and putting them into what could be used as an elevator speech. But I'll close now because you're gonna have individual time to work on that at your tables, and then you can share it with your partners. In saying that we've worked with a lot of researchers in this space, and I think what I come away with, at least, when I work with infectious disease, and half of the researchers, I joke, now I know how we're all gonna die. And then we work with the other half, and we work with people in WexMed and other institutions, and I find out, oh, there's all of these other smart people. It's okay, we're gonna live. That's what I come away with. But really, it's that there are super, super smart people working on critical problems and working on finding those solutions, and that the rest of the world needs to know about it. If a tree falls in a forest and nobody's around to hear it, does it make a sound? If you do all of this amazing research and we can't share it with an audience outside of your own lab, does it make a sound, right? Will you get that grant? Will it advance to the next level? Will it truly have the impact that it could if we can't communicate with a larger audience? I hope that you'll take these tools and strategies that we worked on together today and think about them and use them so that when the tree falls in the forest, when you're working in a lab, right, there's a camera crew there and a journalist and people to write the report about it and send out the press release and share it in a way that everyone can hear it and appreciate it and understand it so that you can advance the important work that you're doing here. Okay? This is an elevator speech. Okay? And it purposefully contains business-like terminology. I was chatting with Dr. Jackson earlier, and she was mentioning that one of the skills that you build here is with the business school, right? Because you're writing a grant, you're really writing a business plan, right? You're really having to justify things in that way. And so this is purposefully inclusive of that type of language, to think about what you're doing, who it's for, what's different about what you do, right? What distinguishes you from others. And if you can put all of this together into an elevator talk, then I'm confident that when the tree falls in the forest, people will hear it. Okay? I'll leave this up for you to work in your groups independently and then to share with each other, and I'll be around for a little bit for questions as well. Thank you.